This year might just be the right year to invest in property. But before you jump in, do you have a low-rate investment loan pre-approved? It might be the right time to invest, but the wrong loan could dent your prospects for achieving the maximum return. Are you armed with the best finance at the sharpest rate? Find out with Finny. Call us now on 1300 002 023 and find out what you could save. Or visit our website, finny.com.au to book an appointment.
This is a Momentum Media production.
Welcome to the Smart Property Investment Show, the podcast by investors for investors.
Hey everyone, welcome to a brand new episode. This is a very special episode. We will be unpacking all the latest from the New South Wales election that took place on the 25th of March 2023. I'm Grace Ormsby and I'm joined in the studio today by one of my colleagues in the real estate team here at Momentum Media, Kyle Robbins. Kyle, welcome to the show.
Grace, thanks for having me. Good morning.
It's been, a pretty long run into it, feels like, into this New South Wales election. I feel like really, ever since the federal election took place last year, everyone was wondering what was going to happen. In New South Wales, it is the most populous state. The policies that do tend to come in here, if they work, we do see them elsewhere. We've obviously had the conversations around stamp duty floating around for a long time now. We've seen a little bit of action in New South Wales. We've seen everyone else looking at how that goes to see what happens next. We've seen that stamp duty issue still get pulled into this state election. What are your thoughts? It's all hindsight now, but it was an interesting lead-in to this New South Wales election. It felt like it started a lot earlier than the official period did really begin. For
sure. The official campaign launches probably would have only happened in February or, maybe late January, but it feels like, the election has been the talk of the town probably since the back end of last year when the stamp duty policies were, passed through Parliament and stuff, because obviously if they don't stay in power, are they going to stay? What's the Labor thoughts of stamp duty? Those were the conversations sort of happening at the time. But, now a bit more cleared up.
Yeah, definitely some more clarity moving forward.
Yeah.
Really, it was interesting as well, both, across the board. If we're not even looking just at property and real estate and what's going on in this sector, we saw a lot of the same policies get taken through. There was no real points of difference across the board.
It was quite amicable, the campaign. There was not a lot of distaste, I'd say, between both parties. It seemed to be they were on similar wavelength on a lot of topics, especially the property-related topics, the stamp duty and stuffs.
Yeah, and obviously, there were some key differences that did come out of that, and each party did go about it in a particular way, but there weren't really any low blows, and I think that's something that did shine through on the Saturday that's just been gone, and both parties really alluded to it on the day, both in Dominic Perrottet's concession speech and then in Chris Minns' acceptance speech, declaring the election victory. A fresh start is how it's been penned. And really, it is probably just at that point. Politics aside, we've got to the end of the pandemic. We're now looking forward. There's been talk around recession and what could be coming. There's a bit of economic uncertainty definitely headed our way. We've seen it overseas, but it is really a pretty cool chance to be resetting on a more local stage.
For sure. And I think now only Tasmania is the only Liberal-led state in Australia. So I think it seems to be the whole country's on a different wavelength, looking for a bit of a new perspective on a lot of issues. As you said, we've sort of seen the back end of the pandemic. So I think the overbearing government's presence is better not felt than felt, if you get what I'm saying. There's people are sort of, the days of the daily press conferences are behind us, and I think people just want governments to plug away behind the scenes and do what's best for the citizens.
That's a really good point. And I guess we have seen that already. We've just seen that lesser presence. We've seen maybe some of the industries that really needed some assistance. Hopefully they start getting some assistance now that we've got, the next 3 years are set.
Yep.
But obviously that does have some ramifications for property, for real estate, for rentals.
Always does.
Investment properties. There's plenty of investors listening to this that are wondering what it does mean moving forward. And really, I don't think it would have mattered too much which party had gotten into power when it does come to real estate. But it is a focus moving forward. And I think we said the same thing after the federal election. We know that both the Liberal Party and the Labor Party are very heavily invested in the real estate space and don't want to see it fail. So that's a good thing.
For sure. I think it's unaffordability or inaffordability has been the buzzword from March 2020 onwards. And I think now governments are realising that it's a fundamental right to have a place to live. And so they're trying to put in some schemes and some methods that will assist people enter their homes, whether that be through the rental market and sort of boosting investors trying to get into that space, or through home ownership. And we've seen both Liberal and Labor pledge proposals to facilitate that.
What I'm actually super interested in moving forward, and you touched on it, the fact that the whole mainland now is Labor-led, and then we've got the federal government that is Labor-led as well. And that's very rarely the case that happens. Usually you've got people voting to at least have some, accountability there. Given that housing is such a big issue and is set to be all the way up until 2030, and the federal government even has talked about, the need to get more supply into the marketplace, without any friction between the states and territories and their federal counterparts, I'm very curious to see if this will make it much easier for that to be the case. You'd think so. You'd hope so. So now we've just got to wait and see.
It'll be very exciting. Very, very exciting. 1 million homes by 2030 or 1 million homes a year by 2030 or whatever the federal government pledged last year. So
by 2030.
Yeah.
We're going to take a quick break there. We'll see you on the other side. Are you looking to create passive income through property? Simon Liu from Housefinder has achieved over $700,000 per annum in passive income by only buying genuinely off-market, below-market value and cash flow positive houses within major capital cities. For the past 7 years after quitting his day job, he has been helping others achieve similar goals to reach financial freedom. On average, his clients achieve $80,000 plus equity extractions from the houses they find, all within 6 months of buying. Visit housefinder.com.au to find out more. Welcome back to this very special episode. We are unpacking the New South Wales election results from the weekend, and it was labelled a fresh start by the incoming Premier, Chris Minns, who has a lot of housing-related policies in the works. And this is no surprise. He was up against an opposition in the Liberal Party that was also pledging a lot of these changes. We've really even seen some of them, taking place since the pandemic began. It's all kind of running in the same vein. And then the stamp duty issue was obviously something that has been talked about for a very long time, and we're finally seeing a little bit of action there. But Kyle, you've done a lot of work in this space, comparing and contrasting both parties' platforms, really, when it did come to policy. Were there many major differences from your perspective?
Not particularly. So on the stamp duty front, Labor stamp duty exemption, price for a first home buyer is $800,000. So properties bought below that don't have to pay stamp duty, whereas the Liberal Party was at the $650,000 mark. So I think that's probably the biggest disparity. There was a few other things. So Liberal Party obviously had land tax instead of stamp duty, which is on properties purchased up to $1.5 million, but between $800,000 and $1.5 million because there's a concession rate for the $650,000 to $800,000 range. So I think that's the key difference is obviously the exemption figure has raised. The concession rate is
still going up to $1 million.
Yeah, so Labor's concession is $800,000 to $1 million, whereas Liberals was $650,000 to $800,000. So
it does make sense, doesn't it? When you're looking at the median house price in Sydney, which is well above $1 million for many of the city's suburbs, you need to be raising that rate a bit higher. Yeah. Otherwise you are penalising those inner city dwellers, aren't you?
Absolutely. And what's interesting is that the Liberal Party said that their policy, would be favourable or could impact about 80% of home buyers, first home buyers. So it'd be interesting to see what the figures are for the Labor policy.
Which is up, it's meant to be around 95%.
Yeah, that's what Chris Minns said. He said it's a tax cut for 95% of people. So it'll be, one to watch, a development to watch and see how that sort of all plays out. And how they plan on, something that it's not directly linked to property, but something that should be considered is the money that's going to be lost from stamp duty, which is a significant contributor to state GDP, where that's going to come in from. So I think, that's definitely something that we'll sort of chase as the new government settles in because
Obviously, they haven't seen the books either up until this point.
Second day of the job. It's probably a bit too much of a heavy question to ask on the second day of the job. So we'll ask those ones in a couple of weeks. But
it's also one of those things as well that it'll flow through to the market, I think, too. We've seen it. We never used to see it, but it's crept into the market, this uncertainty, when we know that there's an election coming up. No matter really what the policies are that are being pushed, people do just kind of take their foot off a little bit. They're less likely to put their properties on the market. We've obviously had a bit of a lull heading into this year. But I think this latest election will have just quelled some of those fears, and we should see some supply coming in, especially once we get Easter out of the way. That's usually a big barrier for people as well. So, this week just gone was the second busiest auction week for Sydney for the year. Next week is expected to be busier. So there you go.
Yeah.
It's all happening.
Yeah. So we'll see if that trend can continue, but it's one to watch.
For sure. We're going to take another break there. Plenty more still to unpack on the latest New South Wales election. See you on the other side of the break.
Would you like the latest news and insights in HR, leadership and people management? HR Leader has you covered. Subscribe at hrleader.com.au.
Welcome back to this very special New South Wales election episode. I'm joined by Kyle Robbins, my colleague in the real estate team here at Momentum Media. We are dealing with this stuff every day. This election has felt like it's gone for a very long time. It's safe to say, as we mentioned before, really since the federal election occurred last year and everyone was wondering what would happen then in New South Wales. And Chris Minns has emerged victorious with the Labor Party. A pretty big result after 11 straight years of Liberal government. Both major parties went into the thick of this election with some pretty similar policies. It's one of those things, if it's not broken, don't fix it.
Yep.
But obviously housing and affordability and the rental crisis that we're seeing does need to be fixed.
Yep.
So both parties did have policies around these areas, and the Labor Party ones are obviously the ones we're going to be taking forward, and there are a lot of concessions and things that they're looking to bring in the rental side of things, Kyle.
Yeah, so they've banned no grounds evictions.
They haven't yet.
Well, it's in the pipeline, and this was going to happen regardless of who won the election. But yeah, now that the Labor are in, the proposal is to ban no grounds evictions. So they'll have a set of reasonable grounds that will allow you to obviously end a tenancy, but no cause evictions is probably a big one for the renters out there.
This is one we have seen in the works for a while now. It's a bit like the stamp duty one, something that we're sort of seeing all the states and territories start to entertain. We've seen it happen in Canberra.
Yep.
Just in the last week. They've brought in no cause evictions are no longer.
Yep.
You cannot do it. And there are plenty of reasons for this to be the case. It's meant to, balance out the landlord-tenant agreement a little bit more.
Yep.
Make sure that tenants are feeling a bit more secure in their housing, especially at such a
tight rental conditions. You could be standing in line for an hour before you get to see a rental inspection. So
it is a stressful period, really.
Yeah, it is. It's good to try to balance that a little bit and just look at it from both angles.
Yeah. So, the fact that it was coming in from both parties was a little bit of a surprise to me.
Yep.
But obviously one that, it does need to happen really. And really, there shouldn't really be any issues here for the landlords out there when it comes to this. There's still plenty of reasons why evictions can take place. And that's not to take away, any of those reasons. It's basically just to stop people from unfairly ending a tenancy agreement.
Exactly. Or at the end of a fixed term agreement or whatever, just saying no thank you. See you later.
So, yeah, that's obviously a big one. And hopefully the legislation comes through for this sooner rather than later. We can see what it actually will look like because obviously there's always going to be a difference between what the pledge is before coming into Parliament and then there's going to be what that actual legislation looks like. So we've sort of got that framework sorted out, but beyond that, we don't know what it will look like. So we'll keep you updated as soon as we know more on that.
Of course.
But one other thing I want to bring up is the build to rent pledge that was made, because we've seen build to rent become a more popular concept or idea across the country, especially up in Queensland. It's really gaining some traction there. We've seen a few developments take place in Melbourne.
Yep.
This is probably one of the first times that we've seen it really, gain some steam in New South Wales.
Well, it has grown in popularity over the last couple of years. I think we done a report early last week that was saying it's one to watch from international investors, and billions of dollars are going to get injected into the build to rent sector. So I think the government taking the lead and initiative, and obviously it's only a pilot program, so I guess a continuation of it will be dependent on the success of the initial project. This one will be on the South Coast. It's a $30 million one, and 30% of the stock that will be built at this project will be made available social and affordable housing. So it's all about that supply and increasing supply to regions that need it. I just got here, the South Coast's vacancy rate last month was 1.9%. Obviously, that's a general figure. There could be regions within the South Coast where it's smaller and tighter, and 1.9% still not it's not balanced. It's not the greatest at all, but it's not one, and it's not in a decimal. So it's good to see a bit of initiative and a government support for what is a widely popular private scheme.
I really like it too that they haven't gone straight for an inner city location.
Yep.
The fact that they're trialling in a region first does make a lot of sense, because we are seeing the regions really grapple with this issue of high vacancy rates. And I think if it does work in a regional environment, of course it's going to work in a city environment. And it is a very innovative
project.
Yeah, even just it's just an innovative concept in the scheme of things, really. You don't have an individual investor who is the landlord of these properties. You've got big private investors coming in and looking after whole groups of people. And there are many, like anything else, there's plenty of pros and cons.
Yep.
But if it can take the pressure off the private landlords and the private rental system, then that's got to be a good thing.
Exactly right.
Well, so many things that we know off the top of our heads at this point. The election's only just happened, as you said. It's the second day on the job at the moment while we're recording this. But it'll be interesting to see how this all develops over the next couple of years. Obviously, once the new government finds their footing and works out what's going on with the books. Moving forward, they're obviously, as New South Wales is the most populous state, these regulations, rules, policy platforms are going to be affecting us for a long time to come. So it will be interesting to see what they do next.
Exactly right.
As always, we will keep you informed. That is our job. We're doing it day to day. And any insights or questions that you may have, don't hesitate to reach out. editor@smartpropertyinvestment.com.au. Until next episode, stay safe and well wherever you're listening from. Bye-bye.
The information featured in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into consideration your financial situation or individual needs and should not be relied upon. Before making any investment, insurance, tax, property or financial planning decision, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you. Guests appearing on this podcast may have a commercial relationship with the companies mentioned.